I think that the product manager in that future is, if you thought the product manager was a bottleneck today, if you felt like a bottleneck today as a product manager, just wait for that future and how much of a bottleneck you feel when, you know, even if there's engineers around you, those engineers are way more productive, right? And maybe the distant future where it's just a bunch of AI agents around you, and you're being really supplemented by your own co-pilot or advisor, coach, whatever. So, like, if we felt overwhelmed and bottlenecky as product managers, like, we have to really get our act together. Like, we have to be really good at managing our emotions, like managing our time, right? This is why this is self-serving, because I happen to teach a course on this. Being really good at using AI as a thought partner. So that's the future that I see. I think that's very much my lens.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Supra Insider. This time, Marc and I sat down with Tal Raviv and Josh Herzig-Marx, both previous guests on the podcast, to have a deep dive into AI. Specifically, the things we talked about included AI prototyping tools, so tools like V0, Replit, Vercel, and how these are changing the way that product managers and just builders in general can get products to market faster without necessarily following the traditional life cycle of product development. And then we talked about how this is going to change just the way teams work together and what's going to be the role of a designer and an engineer and a product manager in a future where these tools have become ubiquitous and people can go from idea to prototype really quickly. Then we spent some time talking about AI agents and what the future of AI agents is going to look like, and maybe what kind of moonshot ideas or pie in the sky ideas could get us excited as builders. We covered a lot of ground. It was really fun as always. Lots of disagreement and spicy takes, I think, in this one. So I hope you enjoy it. Thanks. We were all thinking about how we want to spend this time together because I think we wanted to talk about AI. I mean, Marc and I just recorded an episode about intentions for the year, and one of our big intentions is to get smart and to stay really on the cutting edge of all the developments in AI as much as we can. Otherwise, I think we're going to go irrelevant really quickly. So I think it's important for us, Tal, needless to say, I know you're in there. And then Josh, you pinged Marc and I recently, having built a proof of concept, or it might actually be a fully working product on Replit, I think.
It's fully working. It doesn't do very much, but it's fully working.
And it's to support, yeah, you want to just like comment quickly on what you shared with us, just so the audience hears how cool some of this stuff is up front?
I've had this thing like knocking around inside of my brain for a couple months now, and it has to do with advocacy organizations encouraging running letter writing campaigns. And I don't know if any of you have ever like participated in one of these, but they kind of suck. I mean, it's like honestly the worst version of like form letters sending out. There's a little spot, it's the letters written by the organization. There's a little spot for you to add your own thoughts, which nobody ever does. And you attach your name onto it. And anybody who receives one of these things is like, oh, I got another form letter. And because they know the letter is zero effort, they give it really very little thought whatsoever. And it struck me that this is an opportunity for Gen AI, right? We could do a better job with this thing. It's really hard to write letters. Most people don't like doing it. But I had this vision in my head for something that combined what the organization wanted to say and what the advocate, the person sending it out, the activist, wanted to say. Combine those things together into a unique letter that expresses both of their intentions, add a little bit of variety to it, keep it seeming fresh, and send these things out. And at least, for the moment, before everybody recognizes these are also zero effort, and at a appropriate scale, this could maybe have a little bit more impact. And I've been thinking about it for a while. I was thinking about, do I find something to build? I'm like, oh, wait a minute. Inspired by Tal, I could just go ahead and build this thing. I have the skills to do it. It gives me a chance to try out some of these tools. I tried out a bunch of them. I landed on Replit mostly because it worked relatively consistently, and I learned a lot about it. Plus, I have this awesome tool, which I can, demo or add a link to for you guys.
And by the way, how long did it take from the moment that you're like, okay, I'm going to commit to using Replit to actually like getting it live?
I probably spent Thursday picking Replit, Friday building the first version of it. That's not quite true. A couple of days. Maybe Wednesday I picked Replit. I built, a version on Thursday. I bumped into like an impossible brick wall. I decided just to go rebuild it all from scratch. The second one worked pretty well. I had some frustrating technical stuff. I redid it, but we're talking like less than a weekend.
And when you said there was a period spent in the almost like evaluation stage where you're like looking at the shelf of products before nailing down, like narrowing in on Replit, what were the other front runners?
I don't remember all of them. I'm pretty constrained. I am not a programmer. I do not know how to program. I can sort of read code, but my skills topped out at Logo. Remember that like little turtle from the 80s? Like, 7-year-old Josh, discovered recursion and started drawing like, Mandelbrot sets, in Logo. And that's where it topped out. Like nothing ever useful. I was pretty good at Visual Basic, right? Macro language for Microsoft Excel, like nothing. I can't program. I don't understand it. I don't know how to deploy. When people say, oh, just deploy from GitHub, I look at them blankly. I don't know what any of these words mean. So a lot of these tools are designed to accelerate the work of an existing software engineer. If, Tal, you've been teaching us how to make assistants for product management, these are like literally the very same thing for software engineers. And that won't help me a single bit. I needed something that was a pure AI code generator. There weren't a ton of them. I spent a while with getlazy.ai just because I know, on the one hand, I know the founder. And on the other hand, they have a pretty active community of people who, apologies to all members of their Discord, seem even more clueless than I am and are building a lot of stuff. But I had some technical challenges there. I'm like, okay, who's gotten all the funding? It's Replit. Let's assume that funding is some indicator of success. So I gave it a shot.
Yeah, and the cool thing about Replit compared to like other solutions like Windsurf or Cursor is that it makes the deploying part really easy. Like Cursor and stuff, like they're like a great like coding copilot, but like you still have to figure out the deployment. But Replit kind of takes care to like that end to end basically.
It's not 100% automatic. Like I still have to make these weird value judgments like how big a server do I need? How much memory should it have? Right? How much should it scale? I have no idea. But I was able to make it through most of those things.
And just curious, you mentioned this big brick wall that you ran into and kind of like had to reevaluate without getting too deep into like the details of that. Like what's like the high level takeaway for someone else who might want to start playing with these to potentially avoid hitting a brick wall?
I don't have a high level takeaway necessarily because it's hard to know, like, okay, Replit, and I assume all these other tools are like magic in the literal sense. Like you read one of those like YA novels about the, spunky teen who discovers they're secretly a magician. What do? Right? They try to get the spell exactly right. Because if they don't get it exactly right, something blows up, right? They don't like turn the frog into a prince. They turn the frog into like a giant, like carnivorous frog, right? That's where disaster happens. And is magic in the same ways. It's kind of this, right? You can't tell, is this a deterministic system or not a deterministic system from what you say, but you got to word things really, really carefully. So that's one big insight about it. You are learning to cast spells, at least with the current generation of tools. The other big insight, which is, I think will take a lot of actual software engineers by surprise, is things that seem hard, though it shouldn't, right? Because it's true of all Gen AI. Things that are hard for people are easy for these Gen AI systems, and things that are easy for people are really hard for these Gen AI systems, right? So where have I failed so far? Auth and logging. And you'd think Replit's like, oh, we're going into building a SaaS product mode. Great. We'll just put best practice auth and best practice logging. Like just bake that in from the very, very beginning. Doesn't work that way. I don't know why. There's probably really good reasons. There's actually a LinkedIn post by the founder of GetLazy who basically admits to this and says, we just built an auth module that we attach to all of your apps that's just going to work because auth is too hard. I don't know why that is, right? Somebody who understands the technical side of this will have a really good answer. I should go ask people this. In fact, go ask people after we get off the call. And I'm curious, but like these are the two things that are breaking. I've got logging works great in my dev environment. It is totally broken in my production environment. And I have to like sneak up on auth from the back. Like they don't know I'm building auth, right? They think I'm like adding attributes to users that are totally, totally unnecessary. And I'm validating emails for no particular reason. Like you got to like sneak up on it. The moment you say like build auth, the whole thing breaks.
Yeah, I'm curious, like what are your options at that point, right? It's like you're stuck, you're not technical, so you cannot really solve it yourself. So like what do you do, right? Like do you reach out to support? Do you like play until you maybe break it further? Maybe get lucky, fix it. Like what is, because I think that's like an interesting point, right? Of like what
I'm looking forward to our future episode with Replit PM. But I'll tell you what I've done, and I'll tell you how I kind of contextualize it. So what I've done is I actually ran a bunch of experiments involving auth. Like, can I build an app that does auth at all? And I learned a lot about like spell casting in Replit from building these totally failed experiments. So I'm building like a mental model, right? A black box mental model of what's really happening inside of Replit based around, what I'm observing on the one hand, and my like little bit of mediocre knowledge about how like actual technology products work on the other hand, and trying to like build this little black box together. And that's how I came up with my plan. They have some good tools. They have like a revert tool for reverting your code. They have a database rollback tool. I actually got stuck doing it. Like it broke and nobody's entirely sure why. And like these things are imperfect. I would hate to build like a company around this, but I could totally imagine building enough of a product that I could decide what I want to do next, which is the goal. Like, do I want to like get an engineering co-founder to help me with this? Do I want to invest a little bit of money into like a Replit consultant? I'm sure such a thing exists. Do I just want this thing to exist out there in the world and maybe convince other advocacy platforms like, Action Network or, things like that to incorporate this feature in? Because if I can build it over a weekend, it's not like they can't rebuild this. There's no moat here. I just want this thing to exist, right? I just want to change the world by giving people an idea. So I don't know what to do next, but as a as a real MVP live thing, this is more than sufficient for the stuff I built with it.
Very cool.
Yeah. I think another honorable mention here definitely goes to Lovable. Like it's hard to talk about all this stuff without. So that's like another big competitor, I'd say.
Okay.
And I actually did an experiment a few days ago where I had the same idea, and I had Replit and Lovable open side by side. I recorded it, but I did it just for myself. And it's actually when I did the two side by side, there's like little frustration. I experienced a lot of like the frustrations as Josh. Like there's all these things where like that was really easy for you, but like you're getting stuck on this but when you had kind of both together, it kind of got me to zoom out and see that how much of the things that we're frustrated with, like in the hands-on day to day, are clearly going to go away. Like, cause like they've solved that, but they haven't solved that. This is just a matter of a feature. LLMs are totally, going to get better at it really got me to start thinking when I evaluate an AI tool or use AI to think, well, is this going to be important 2 months from now? Is this going to be important 2 years from now? Like how much of this is literally things are moving really fast and like we didn't even have this, 3 weeks ago. So I think most of the frustrations is like under that category.
I find myself kind of, if any of you like read like Wirecutter, or just like if you're trying to make a purchasing decision, you want to like compare the best options in the market, and they break it down to like the key differences. If you're looking for this, you go with this. Like I think there's like so many options popping up. Like I have a Chrome window that's good because I want to set aside time in the next couple of weeks to like really go deep on tools. And I've got like V0, I've got Cursor, I've got Bolt, I've got Replit, and I've got now Lovable, and then the one that Josh just mentioned.
Lazy. Get lazy.
Like how are we supposed to make sense? Because also getting the real value from these, from what I can tell, is you hit a paywall pretty quickly with Replit. I couldn't even get it to like build the first version of what I wanted without having to pay $20. So it's like
I'm paying Replit $25 a month, and you pay basically 25 cents per like reasonable request in code. And I'm just going to warn you, this isn't like writing a PRD is 25 cents. It's like adding one small increment, and a lot of times it's buggy. You got to do it again and again and again. I'm probably out like $60 now with Replit, which on the one hand is real money. On the other hand, holy shit, it was only $60 to build this thing.
Yeah.
Like but you're right. These aren't like just for fun hobbyist type tools yet.
Yeah.
There's also like a tool. Isn't it the same tooling challenge that everything else has, right? If you talk to your engineering buddies, right, the ones who are like old, my age, right, they've been using the same text editor the entire time, right? They got their like fingers coded to whatever keyboard shortcuts actually exist, and it's not going to change because the investment's really, really high. I think it's worth today thinking about the investment you're making, not in how to use the tool, but how to think about what software means. So you're really not learning about the tool. Like, try really hard not to learn about the tool itself, because that's going to go away, right? As you said, Ben, 3 months from now, it's going to be 10 times better. And 3 months after that, another 10 times better. Like, it's improved. Like, they like are barely functional today. They're improving so fast. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Like, how do you break down a problem? What are the important questions to ask? How do you communicate with something like this? Like, who's responsible for like, yeah.
So I'd say even that layer you just mentioned. So earlier you mentioned like magic spells.
Yeah.
And that's still true. It's a lot less than it was 2 years ago, right? Like, remember LinkedIn was like covered with people with like these slide decks and all these like magic words you needed to use, and that's really died down. And there's still good, valid tips out there, like for how to use LLMs and how to have a conversation. But anytime like that somebody, highlights a magic spell or how to talk to an LLM or like a pattern, you should always ask it this afterwards. And it's really widely accepted. My hypothesis is like that the LLM companies have a really strong incentive to abstract that away because that's creating a barrier to entry.
Right.
So right now, somebody like Josh figured it out, but how many other people, are being blocked from getting the same results as Josh? So like 2 weeks from now, or that what was a magic spell that Josh figured out, I expect like the number one incentive for these LLM companies is for that not to be a magic word you need anymore.
Yeah, I think what's super interesting is like right now we're talking about like personal use cases, but I think where it gets really interesting is for like, B2B like use cases, because then at that point it's like I don't think businesses have the luxury to like be changing tools like every like 2 weeks. So I think it's going to be an interesting opportunity. So whoever can advise those companies on like, hey, here is the tool you think you should use, and here's the one that I think they're going to be innovating the fastest and going to be around for a while. Because otherwise it's just, it's especially for bigger companies, it's such a pain to adopt something and then rip it off after 2 weeks.
It's almost like the choice of the tool and the implementation of the tool and the ability to like get IT to approve it and to procure budget or whatever is going to move slower than the speed with which you actually are picking which tools you want to use, right? Like by the time you, like, let's say you want to use V0 to like start building software at your company and you need to get IT to approve it probably because it's like, that's your code. Then maybe by the time it all gets over, now like Lovable is better. And I'm like, crap, like I don't want to be married to a Replit. I want to use Lovable. And then by the time Lovable gets to like the finish line, you could start using it, a different tool pops up. So it's like, I just wonder how the decision-making process within these companies is going to be keeping up with like the speed of innovation and giving its employees the choice of using the tools they want to use.
And also the business model, right? Like a lot of these B2B enterprise tools, like they are famous for multi-year contracts, right? Or at the very least 1-year contract. Like that, if that's the case, why would it feels so risky to commit to one of these tools for a year, given that things are changing so quickly? So it's almost like the go-to-market for these companies completely change, right?
I think that they're probably going to end up having to compete for who can become the system of record that's the stickiest and has the highest switching costs, right? Like if I think about why I switched from ChatGPT to Claude, even if ChatGPT's new project is better than Claude, at this point, I've actually done enough work in Claude that there's like somewhat of a switching cost if I actually want to use ChatGPT instead of it, like if I want to leave Claude. And that's just like a very minute example that is probably on the easier side of like switching costs. But if just imagine now your entire product is built on Replit. If you want to now build your product that's being used by 10,000 customers on a different product, it feels like Replit would be sticky in that scenario, right?
I mean, it feels like today is actually pretty straightforward. Don't build your production system on Replit. Like you shouldn't do that, right? I think the real question is Replit a replacement for, your entire AWS hosting environment, right? Where Amazon gives you a lot of tools to build code faster. They always have, right? They have specialized instances, they have specialized databases, all sorts of things they can do, right? Or is this a replacement for Figma or an adjunct of Figma? And I think today it's very clear these are tools for design, right? If you were to hand an actual engineer the code that Replit built for mine, and Replit is, by the way, designed for the code to be handed off to engineering, right? I think one of the Replit's biggest users are schools where kids are learning programming and use it to like scaffold up the outline of an app, and then you have to like go fill in the individual pieces of it. So, kids aren't forced to do things like auth. Anyway, like it's a really good replacement for Figma, right? You could spend a while wireframing something or just build a thing inside of your head, right? And you can like have conversations around the interaction, right? Not where the pixels go. That's a really interesting conversation to have as a designer. If I were running a company and building a SaaS product and somebody were to like run it off of Replit, like that's even more nerve-wracking than running your SaaS product off of Retool. It wasn't built for that. And you have no reason to be confident that it's going to be sufficiently reliable. And the moment you have, any VC doing technical due diligence on you, and they realize you're just, I'm using my line here now, realize you're just, 3 prompts in a trench coat, like nobody's going to.
Ding, 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 ding. We did it.
There you go.
We got to the line.
I just had a
nobody's taking you seriously, and they shouldn't take you seriously.
I just had a visual from Space Jam when the aliens are trying to like pretend.
Yeah.
No, totally. Man, so you think so where's the? Sorry, go ahead, Tal.
What you guys were saying gave me another thought, which is like, okay, what will be a really important differentiating factor will be the portability, or like how much, like it's vertically unbundled. That's a fancy word for like Replit is not AWS. Replit can run on anything, right? If somebody, or if it's not, somebody will come along and be able to run on anything, and then that's what companies are going to choose because they don't want to have to commit to much bigger decisions than just like this tool. And what else was I going to say? Oh, and then in that world, that the switching costs for one of these tools will not exceed the switching costs of hiring or firing a person, which is a lot shorter, unfortunately, in tech than 3 years.
So just
The
like you
tools
could
only
hire
seem expensive
someone
today.
like just to make sure I'm following that point, Tal. So like if you hire someone, generally give them probably 3 months before you know if it's working or not, right? Like but then when you let them go, if you have to backfill them, maybe it's another few months of kind of like adjustment. So you're saying maybe the switching cost for the software ends up being something in the range of like, I might take a 2-3 month hit to switch tools, something like that.
Yeah, probably less. But to your example of like ChatGPT to Claude, right? Yes, there is a switching cost. But like if you had a person filling that role as an assistant, or someone on your staff, okay, you'd lose some time until you figure out the next one, and it would take some time to fill them in. Probably a lot less time to fill in the new person, especially if your project knowledge and all that stuff, right? If that's like really portable, there is a switching cost, but I don't think it'll ever exceed the switching cost of
human labor,
a team member. Yeah.
Also, the switching cost feels less risky too, because in this world you could run those two tools at the same time, right? And then once the time is ready, you can just turn one off and then keep the other one on, right?
I wonder how many people are currently doing the same exact thing in multiple tools. Like what kind of duplication of efforts existing right now as people are just like exploring?
I do a lot of work. Like for like Copilot stuff, like where I need to get feedback on something, I'm actually curious if like different models have different points of view that I have missed. So yeah. And even like I sometimes use Hunch for that use case, where like I'll have the same prompt, but then I'll have like different blobs with different models and see like what the different output.
Oh, that's a really good use case, because I think the way you explain Hunch to me is like you could almost like take something that you want to get output related to, and you could like draw an arrow, be like, give me output, but pull it from Sonnet 3.5, and then draw a different arrow to a different part of the canvas, say, give me O1 output. Like you could do that with as many models as you want and just like visually scan to just see the differences.
Exactly. And I think the good thing about that too, I think a lot of times I do less about having different points of view, which is also helpful, but also to build an intuition for what model is good for what, right? Like I think now, for example, it's like common knowledge that, Claude models are probably better writers than ChatGPT, or they make it more human, but probably took a while for someone to get to that point, right? Early on.
So how do you, okay, so there's a couple ways we could go, but I want to get to talking about agents and AI agents. I've been talking to a few designers recently. I want to say probably 3 in the last couple of weeks, who are worried about what these tools mean for the future of the role of designers. So it sounds like what I heard earlier is that if Replit is less likely to replace engineers than it is to replace designers, or the need for designers. What do you guys think about that? Like, do you think designers are on their way out, or what's the role of the designer in this new world? Do they just become experts in using these tools, like the prototyping tools?
Isn't this the question that designers have been having ever since product managers started doing discovery? I mean, go read like the comments under Teresa Torres's LinkedIn posts. It's a bunch of angry designers saying, something along the lines of, you product managers don't know how to do real discovery, and you keep taking over discovery. And on the one hand, they're not wrong. Like, somebody who has like an actual degree in like human factors engineering and has been doing this for 30 years will do way more design, way better like discovery process over the course of like 3 months I'm going to need. But I can't wait for a 3-month discovery process. I need to do something continually, right? It's going to be the very same problem for a designer, right? The designer who's going to like slave over Figma or Sketch or something to very carefully put together what's the interaction model going to be, and test every little bit and use all of it. And like, yeah, like if that's what you need, like these tools aren't ready. But if you need to be like, how approximately does a good enough thing work so we can get value to our users as fast as possible? And so I can show this to my engineering team and they understand what to build and they can play with it and understand how a user might interact. Like if that's what you're looking for, yeah. As a designer, you're kind of screwed.
Like I think that the way I like to think about this, Ben, is there's not like two types. I mean, there's probably like more buckets, but there's two types of designers that I work with, right? There's like the designers that are just like really strong visually, but I still have to hold their hand to like be like, hey, here's kind of how the like high level workflow should look like. Here's what kind of have in mind for this solution, right? I think those people are screwed, right? Because like if I can just take those workflows that I was doing anyways and bring them into Vercel or Replit, like it's going to do it faster, more consistent, and with less back and forth, right? Like closer loops. But I think the best designers that I work with, right? Like I own the discovery, right? Like really thinking about, here's the problem that we should go after. But like how we solve that problem, that's what the designer owns. And the best designers, while they're influenced by existing patterns, they're really good at like thinking first principles and like creating new patterns that don't exist before. And those new patterns are the ones that maybe give you an edge over other tools or competitors. So I think those people are going to be fine. And actually they're probably, again, I think the theme is like, if you're good and you're like, are a creative person, your productivity is going to 10x, right? And your impact going to 10x. But I think there's not that many designers that are able to do that very well, to be honest.
I would agree. I've worked with more visually talented designers than designers that I can just like trust to like tackle a really ambiguous problem and come back with high level great options of how to approach it, including blowing up current patterns in the product. I suspect AI is not going to be that good for now at blowing up existing patterns in a established product and almost like revisiting the overarching way that the product does certain workflows.
Yeah, that'll take at least 2 more weeks.
It's probably not wrong. Like at the pace of these improvements, I mean, that makes sense.
I mean, you raise a good question, right? Because today, I assume that like Replit, Lovable, whatnot are watching me as their customer use their tool to learn how to make it better, right? In the same way that OpenAI watched everybody prompt engineer to make better prompts, are like, okay, we'll just bake prompt engineering into our interface. So whatever you type in, we're going to re-engineer it to be a better prompt, right? They're doing the same thing with the prompts that I'm putting in the process. What I'm waiting for, and I don't know how the commercial terms are going to work for this, is I want Replit and Lovable and everybody else to watch the applications they build get used by the applications users to figure out what are better ways, right? Like we all assume the menu goes to the top, there's a hamburger button, you click it, you drop, right? We got certain like assumptions we bake into like, normative application development and everything kind of looks the same.
It seems to me like Mixpanel should build one of these tools because Mixpanel is sitting on so much data about how people use applications that they seem like they're actually probably sitting on one of the most robust data sets for like how to build intuitive interfaces based on like conversion rates on screens by button placement, styles, designs, all that stuff.
We should get the CPU of Mixpanel on.
Yeah. Or even like another interesting one is like Stripe, or thinking about which apps monetize best, right? And like being able to take that data and then connect it to maybe, is there something about their onboarding? Or is it something about the apps, the app sales? Is it about like, what are the people doing in the first 2 days that's really valuable? And I think like whoever can combine all that information together, feed it back to the models, I think it's going to be super helpful. But again, I think you're going to be able to copy existing models, or existing ways of doing things, but I don't know if it's going to be able to generate like new ways of doing things based on the information that it has. I think that's a part that I'm not sure about.
I mean, if this follows the same pattern as every other technological breakthrough, right? First is going to be used to do the existing boring things better, faster, cheaper. And then at some point, we're going to understand, like we as the builders of product, right? Whether we're product managers or engineers, doesn't really matter what our titles are. But we as people who are builders of product, right, are going to discover that this enables new kinds of capabilities, functionalities, interactions, products that never existed before, right? I liken Gen AI to databases, right? First, they were R&D problems. Then they were a matter of CapEx spend. Then they're a matter of OpEx spend. Then they were essentially free. And the moment they become free, you get databases in everything. And the number of tools that we create that use data skyrockets in a way that never did before. Like we're doing more things with data than ever before. And I think we're waiting for the same thing with Gen AI, both as an engine, right? But also as the builder.
A thought experiment I've been kind of running in my head, almost like weekly at this point for the last, I don't know, 6 months, is like, in a world where products become like, where like, imagine your mom can build a production ready product, like a full, like anyone could just build a product, like a 5-year-old could build a product, like anyone, right, could just build a product that fully works. What differentiates who captures market share, right? Like, where's the actual enterprise value created? And I think it's really about understanding problem and unlocking distribution, and like solving the right problem for a group that has a big pain point and getting the right messaging in front of them in distribution feels like where. So maybe that's a long way of saying like product minded go to market, something like that. I'm curious what you guys think. Like, what that's where we're heading, right? There's no doubt we're heading towards a world where, like, in 10 years, like 10 years probably way too far in the future. In 5 years, maybe anyone could build the same exact product if they have that idea, like within a few days on their own.
Yeah, I think about this a lot. It's what is product success, right? It's like MRR, people using something, right? Like going back to first principles. So what does that mean? That means that there's like human beings, the users are still human beings, the customers are still human beings. Why is that human beings? Because human beings are the ones that have, like wallets and bank accounts. And so they're the unit of economic decision making. And that's so, okay, if that's still true, I don't know if that's still gonna be true. That could be false, but let's go with that. If that's still true, and I'm making a decision as a PM on like what analytics software to use or whatever, right? Like what communication chat tool to use and so on. So I have to be convinced to swipe a credit card. Like if that's not changing, then how to get to me and how to convince me and how to build my trust, how to convert and sell to me and everything that needs to happen there, right, is as true as ever. And then it's still like that great quote, right? First time founders think about products, second time founders think about distribution. So yeah, I totally agree. I think, but that's like a really big if, right? We can poke holes in that. That might be getting too deep, but
Okay,
yeah, I still think it's going to be people as customers.
It's going to be, it's not only is it going to be, it's always been a lot easier to make a lot of money by changing demand rather than meeting demand. Like
growing the pie.
No one demanded continuous scrolling of photos until Instagram made this a thing that we all wanted. Like, it's easier to reprogram brains for what it is they desire than it is to figure out, like, I don't know, how do we make 1 billion people happy with where they are today? Much easier to change what it means for them to be happy or content. I don't know if I agree with that or not, but it certainly does seem like the scary aspect of Gen AI, right? Once we're having as many conversations with computers as we are with each other, which we're pretty close to today, right? Depending on how you define conversation. Is it really so worthwhile to like figure out like what it is we want and what it is we need with our pocketbooks rather than just, change that?
Like the worst case scenario, what you're saying is like, imagine many decades ago, somebody's like, hey kid, I know you want to get better at soccer and you like soccer, but how about a cigarette? That's like the worst case scenario of what AI could do. I think what you're saying is really smart. Like right. That's actually very, very plausible and scary.
And the Danish national team is like, joke's on you. You can smoke and play soccer at the same time.
Yeah. So Josh, what's happening in my head is I'm almost like picturing a world where like the AI tools that are being built almost start to learn people's behaviors and almost like shape themselves to make people maybe desire things that they are not explicitly desiring or not consciously desiring, but giving them a solution that resonates on some subconscious level that makes them adopt that product because the products are going to be so good at predicting what people will, how to play to our most basic psychological needs like that. That's what was coming to my mind is like this.
Good thing there's no precedent for that in the last 15 years at all.
Yeah, I was gonna say that just sounds like marketing.
Poor Silicon Valley white guys who reinvented advertising.
No, but if you think about the way that marketing. Okay, this is actually really interesting because like if you think about, I've worked with marketing teams at early stage startups, and this is not even with like big company resources, but like early stage startups where I look at their just number of ads running right now and the speed with which they're iterating on ads, and it looks like this crazy like hundreds of ad campaigns running in parallel. And so very savvy marketers move so fast, right? but product development has not followed that speed, right? Like
Yeah.
think about how often our marketing partners have gotten frustrated that they've been asking for something for 3 months and it's still not ready, right? But imagine a world where like the product can evolve at the same pace as marketing based on learnings. And maybe it's not about like everyone can build a product is going to be a commodity, but who can build the product that evolves the fastest based on what people who use the product want? So like velocity almost becomes a key attribute of like which product to go for, because you're using the product that evolves the fastest or gets to learn about you the fastest or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, I could almost see a world in which we have a lot of data about people. Like maybe there's just companies that just create one-off products for you based on everything that you know. And like the product that they're selling Ben is very different than the product that they're selling Mark. And they're just like have figured out how to keep that feedback loop so short that almost it's like generating the product as you start using it. Like I could almost see like, because if that, like I completely agree, Ben. I think like I think that what marketing knows about someone and how quickly product can move is going to continue to shrink so quickly to the point that maybe, you can do that. And maybe that's the most effective way to, maybe people will focus on one category or one, I don't know, vertical use case, but the company that wins is the one that like can be like, hey, like I'm solving exactly what you need, while maybe like baking in some best practices along the way.
Okay, spicy take. I think that's, best case scenario, the way to build a lot of crappy products. And worst case scenario, like that's just the great stagnation of software. Because, I mean, Ben, as you were describing this with marketing, I'm thinking to myself, well, marketing moves faster than product does, but sales moves fastest of all. Like if you watch a good salesperson, they're like adjusting their pitch 6 times in 10 minutes to match what it is that the prospect says they want or says they're looking to buy. We could change the software 6 times in 10 minutes as well. But anybody who sold software, right? Enterprise, direct to consumer, doesn't matter. Anybody who sold software knows that people don't really know what they want, right? And successful software companies aren't successful because they give everybody what they say they want or what they think they want. It's because they have a unique understanding of what the true market needs are, right? And sales and marketing is about bridging that kind of friction to pull your market along, to find the people who are willing to acknowledge it, to, shift the dynamics, all of those things, pull those people along. Right? You can imagine a world where, like, I don't use Microsoft Word, I don't use Google Docs anymore, I don't use Coda or Notion. I have this, 20 years from now, amazing local AI, right? Sitting on my wrist, on my desk, I don't know where it sits, and like it builds me the perfect word processor for what I need right now. Not even word processor, the perfect writing companion, right? The language just flows magically. And it's different for you, Ben, it's different for you, Tal, it's different for you, Mark. Everybody has their own different one. I mean, math says we're going to end up with a whole bunch of like local maxima where my immediate needs are solved. I have no urge to go any further. And everybody's got a shitty word processor that like barely competes with PFS Write from 1982 on my Apple.
I mean, a counter example, just some quick counter, like, isn't that what social media is?
Exactly.
Right? Like, like you're getting a personalized experience that's very unique to you, and it's constantly changing based on what it learns about you, but you're still kind of making good changes at the global level, right? So
is
like,
it? Social media sucks. Social media is like the worst discourse. Like,
go
read your favorite writer on social media and go read their long form stuff with an editor. Like,
I actually see a different analogy in social media on the creator side. So you think about like the TikTok universe, or for the like a next 48 hours, I guess, or like the Instagram reels, right? Like, so you have like a lot of creators that they actually, marketers iterate quickly, like creators can iterate really quickly, right? It's like the cycle is pretty fast. So they're constantly like iterating and seeing what works, and they're getting feedback, and the algorithm's kind of giving that feedback, right? Like in terms of likes and engagement and comments and like how viral it's going. And they're constantly, okay, that kind of worked well. I'm going to adapt. I'm going to do more of that. And like, but I'm going to change this part. And this kind of happens really naturally and implicitly. And I'm sure for younger generations, it's like even faster. And that's a local maximum that Josh is talking about.
Yeah.
Like in any given time, you have all this iteration, but it's iterating around the same idea and like style, or what, I'm gonna, like a year and a half ago, maybe it's still a thing where it's like, if I put the selfie, my iPhone selfie camera and like a weird angle in my car, as if I just pulled over and gave a hot take, right? Like that's going to get a lot of engagement and people iterate on that. But then once in a while, like there's a new trend. And where does that new trend come from? Some creator was like iterating more randomly, or like did something accidentally. Or if you look at like people's like really popular YouTubers, before they went big, you scroll down and like sort by oldest, you'll see that like they did a lot of like random stuff, and then like one thing took off, and then like they just kept like doing more of that. And there's like, how did that one random thing happen? So maybe there's an analogy here for AI and product development. I don't know if that randomness is going to come from actual randomness, from a person, from AI, all of the above, but that's how you break out of that local maximum. And then I'm sure you'll have lots of AIs like kind of clustering around that and iterating around that and optimizing that.
So where's the role for vision in this, right? The Henry Ford statement: if I'd listened to my customers, I would have built them a better horse.
My bet, actually, Mark, I kind of disagree with what you said earlier. I think AI can be very creative. And the reason is that, actually, Ben proved this week. Ben and I did an experiment. I think we did a little proof, but I actually think creativity is not that special. Like, okay, so people, I'm including myself, have this mental model like AI is just completing based on the past, right? It's trained on what exists. So like, how can it possibly do something creative? Well, what about us?
I mean,
Like,
that's how our creativity works.
That's how our creativity works,
yeah.
right? So what is our creativity? There's endless like thoughts about this, but in simple terms, I think a lot of people agree. It's like you take something you have today and you ask, well, what if I took something away? Like, what if I took just one part of that away? Like, I created that constraint. Or what if I took two things and combined them and created that constraint and like the logical extension of that? And that's actually our brains completing, right?
Mm-hmm. But what
that's
it doesn't have, as far as I can tell, is taste. Yeah, I don't know how good the taste of AI is, right? So just because I could take the head of an elephant and the body of a zebra and whatever, like, and combine these things into something new, there needs to be some element of taste as part of that, right?
Just 1 second, I'm going to buy lszebra.ai. Just gonna.
There's also like all the pieces kind of hitting together in a weird way, right? Of like the taste, then like the random idea that you're having in the shower, versus like the ability of like knowing, hey, now is a time to think about these first principles. Here's a time where maybe following like an existing pattern is better, right? And I think kind of creating that perfect storm, maybe you're right. I think we could maybe like decompose creativity into a formula. It would probably be a pretty complex formula, but but like for all the variables and for all the conditions to be true at the same time, I think that's the part where I'm like, how do we make that consistently, and do we even know when we want creativity and when we don't, and when is it a good time to bring it in?
I don't know. I kind of go with Tal, right? If there's anything I've lessened from Gen AI, it's that the things that we think of as being hard as humans are actually pretty easy for Gen AI, and the things we think of as being hard for computers are often pretty easy for humans. And like, I bet creativity is boring. Like,
I think you still need to give it enough inputs, right, Josh?
I don't know if it's enough inputs. I think it's the thing that's missing is vision, right? It's like the direction, like, where are we going to? Because if you give me like a happiness inducing Gen AI tool to build whatever, like, I'm going to go in a bad direction with that thing, right? I can see it. Look, let's bring this down to like software product entrepreneurship. I can see this today with a little tool that I'm building, right? That I built over a weekend. What's the mistake that every engineer makes when they go start a company, when they go build it, right? They put all their time and energy into building the product and making it as awesome as they possibly can, right? Whereas what should they be doing on day one? They should be focusing on go to market.
Yeah.
Right. Is there an audience of people who care about, who value what you're building? Do you have a way to reach them? Do they have a mechanism for paying you in dollars, attention, or reputation? Right? That's what they should be focusing on. I know this, right? I've been the mediocre entrepreneur. I coach people about this thing all the time. What am I doing? Ooh, let's add email address. Let's validate email address here. Like, let's replace the send, like, in addition to send email button, let's have like a copy to your own. Like, I want to like add these because it's so easy to do. It makes me so happy, right? AI right now makes you so happy. Happiness is a terrible objective function. It's terrible for, happiness is a bad objective function for a founder. It's a bad objective function for a human being, right? Ben, you know what I'm talking about. Your kids are getting to this age, right? You say, I just want my kids to be happy, but you don't. Because you know intuitively that happiness for your children is a bad objective function, right? That's how kids end up being spoiled little brats.
Okay, but...
You mean she can't have 10 cookies for dinner?
Absolutely can.
That's what powers this podcast.
But I'm curious, isn't vision though like creativity in its purest form?
I think vision is
The problem I have with that is that vision presumes like some goals, right? And the relationship between creativity and vision and goals to me is that the vision is what the world's like when you've accomplished your goals. So you need the ability to like clearly paint that picture of my goals having been met. What does the world look like? And then the creativity is like the assembling process. It's like the Transformers assemble, like what needs to happen to get to this future.
The strategy.
Strategy is very creative, right? I do think strategy is an extremely creative exercise that I do think AI is probably capable of. What I think is the thing I just would add to this recipe that we're assembling here for how to fit these things together is constraints. And I think that constraints, the best designers, again, going back to designers I've worked with, thrive with constraints. Like constraints actually increase the level of creativity they can bring to the project. And sometimes people just, they completely freeze when constraints cannot be articulated in ways that foster creativity. So I think if you combine like goal, vision of the future, and then some constraints that are guiding the process, I suspect the AI is going to get very good at what we call creativity, which is like, how do I get there?
I think AI could probably create its own constraints. Like, what is a constraint? Like, you look at a situation and you deconstruct it and you say, hey, let's like take that piece out. What happens then? Or let's like eliminate half these options for the hell of it, right? Or based on a bigger strategy, like the company level strategy or something. So I think it's also kind of a logical. Well, and I think yeah, like Josh said, creativity's turns out it's maybe not that special or kind of boring.
Wow, so we really are screwed. Amazing.
We still have bank accounts. That's what I'm trying to say.
Well, but that's actually Tal.
For now.
The bank account thing is something I was gonna say once we finish that thread, which is you're saying like assuming we're still in charge of our own wallets and stuff, and I as a human is the one that you have to convince to pay for your software. What I wanted to ask, maybe this is a good transition point to AI agents, but like how far are we from a world where agents have budget? Right. And like you're actually, instead of trying to market to a human, you're maybe marketing to another piece of software because that piece of software has constraints and goals and things it's trying to do, just like we just talked about. And maybe now you can offer a solution that allows that AI agent to accomplish its goals faster. So is there a world where like microtransactions start to happen between agents?
It already is. It's been happening for 15 years, right? Like just a prototype of that is ad tech. And let's say I'm just a small business running an ad on Facebook. I'm giving an agent a budget. It's going with that wallet and it's making decisions. So
it's a really good point.
In a sense, it's already happening.
Programmatic trading has been doing this. We've been spending trillions a year programmatically. And of course, this is the whole idea of smart contracts.
So are we just witnessing like, are we witnessing almost like democratization is a loaded term, but like are we just witnessing almost like a 100xing of like the availability of AI agents, like from big corporations with large budgets to like everyday people? Like, could I give agents budget and just be like, just do this thing for me, and it just like gets creative with it? I don't think we're quite there at the moment.
I don't know if I can think of a good agent that does that, but I mean, I think like a lot of these AI agent companies are trying to move to like an outcome-based pricing model, right? Where you're like, hey, like I'll pay you this much if you're able to accomplish this much, which is in a way kind of like a version of that. I think the really interesting one is like without less structure, be like, hey, you have this amount of money, use whatever tool you can find to get, like, it's almost like kind of going back to constraints. I think now there's gonna be agents that are really good with constraints of like, hey, here's kind of like what you have, here's the goal, get there, and here are like the tools that you can use. I think it's going to be really interesting when you open up those constraints and the tools that they can use. But yeah,
it's actually, if there's something that like playing with Replit and Lovable like really drove home for me, it's that the word agent is overly dramatic and it's not black or white. So I think it's just going to be gradual, right? It could start with, a year ago, like 2 years ago, whatever, somebody like is doing their job and they have ChatGPT open on another monitor. And then over time that just started to help with more and more and more tasks. And then it started to, some of the stuff, it would go off and search the web on its own without having the person to go search the web and paste it in, right? And you can see where this is going. And so when I use something like Replit, that's like really fast forward because it's doing a lot of it's determining a lot of its own tasks. It's actually asking me, it's like checking in with me about a decision. It's prompting me, like how far do you want the scope to go, which actually happened. And like at some point that's going to keep going. And the difference between like, is it an agent, is it not an agent? I think anybody actually using these things won't be asking themselves these questions, right? And then at some point it's going to just be really reliable. And it's maybe I'm there with the credit card, or maybe I'm just like, why am I here with the credit card? Take it.
Yeah, it is now a good transition to maybe talk about like kind of the AI conversation, and maybe like the background here is Tal shared this article from the Strategy, and yeah, does any one of you want to kind of summarize the high level of the article?
I think
there's a lot covered there.
Yeah, there's a lot covered. How about we each like summarize like that like imprint, like what stayed with them. So for me, when I was first reading this article, I'm like, am I reading the right article? Like, did you send the wrong article with the subject line? Because it starts talking about internet advertising and how when it first came out, like the concept, like this highly personalized Facebook style internet advertising, that there's this idea of getting these like large Fortune 100 consumer packaged good companies to adopt it, and they would like invest a lot in it. They really saw it as the future, and at some point it like flipped and they like rejected it and really downsized their budgets. And then over the years there was different moments where like these like Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies would like protest Facebook and cut their budgets. But what became clear was in parallel to that, those companies were like a really small percent of Facebook's revenue, because there were a lot of internet native companies that had been founded around that, Facebook model of advertising, highly personalized, and Google model. And so these like consumer packaged good companies, they rejected it fundamentally, or they cut down their budget because like it just doesn't work, because like he gives this whole explanation of shelf space. Like there's just this old world that still exists, but it was like this world that had evolved and was self-consistent. And then you had these like new companies that had evolved around this form of advertising. And his point about AI, to bring it back, is that, we're talking a lot about bringing AI to work and how AI can help us at work, but we're thinking about the existing companies that are built around human beings and teams. And like, it's kind of like when you go from like a fighter jet to a drone, like there's all sorts of things that you just don't need, right? You don't realize how much of a fighter jet that has a person that needs to be kept alive, has versus, and when you get rid of that, like it's actually so much more than you realize. And it's just going to be, it's not like the idea of transforming Procter and Gamble into a digital native company. Don't try that. And what we should look forward to is seeing a lot of companies started today built around the fact that AI can take on a lot more functions, instead of trying to retrofit it to, a 10,000 person company or even a 100-person company. That's what I got of it. I think there's a lot more in the article, but like that's one thing that really stuck with me.
And the idea is that Procter and Gamble is still kind of heavily relying on Facebook ads now too, right? Like they're still using that a good amount, but maybe like was that the idea too of like
not as much as a company founded since.
Okay.
They're still very much like, hey, we take billboard ads and TV commercials, and we buy shelf space, like we pay for the real estate and et cetera. The whole, we have this, we just work in terms of this big brand. And so
the P&G model doesn't work with Facebook's model of automatically optimized performance marketing, right? Facebook says, you tell me how much you're willing to pay for a conversion, and we're going to find you as many conversions as we possibly can at that price point. Right? Tell us how much you're willing to spend. Tell us how much you're willing to pay per conversion. We're going to try to hit that as close as we possibly can by knowing everything we can about every individual person and run that optimization across all the programs. Procter & Gamble says, we got to sell 146 boxes of Pampers in every single, I'm trying to think of what grocery stores are nearby, right? And every single grocery store in the tri-state area, right? Otherwise, we lose one of our facings. I like it when Ben Thompson uses CPG for his analogies, because I spent way too many years in the CPG space. And it's a really good example of, and built a unsuccessful company in the CPG space, because fundamentally we didn't understand like what were the games people are playing? What were the actual rules of the business? And our startup was literally about trying to take the rules of online advertising, specifically Google AdWords, and apply them to the grocery space. And it was wildly successful in everything we did and totally meaningless for the industry, which was a fascinating lesson that many companies have learned over the years.
Yeah. I think that where my head goes with kind of this part too is like it almost sounds like P&G had the Procter and Gamble had the luxury to not adopt the kind of the way of advertising in Meta, or just like never really adapt it, because maybe it was like a small part of the company, or a big part, a very important part, but not like the whole. But I think with this, AI agent revolution, where you can actually save a lot of workforce for all these different departments, not just marketing, maybe engineering, maybe design, like can companies actually afford to be Procter and Gamble, right? Like I think that's like where my head is going. Like, can you survive? Can you like price? Can you compete on price? Can you compete on quality? Can you compete on speed if you're not making that transition?
Right. You're saying like maybe in this example, like maybe the analogy breaks down because Procter and Gamble, their competition had the same issues.
Exactly.
And so, yeah, they were kind of all stuck. And maybe it's easier to change how an organization runs, right, than it is to change how your ecosystem works. And maybe a good question to ask, like, we'll put aside AI because it's a big question mark, but like, what about Microsoft Excel or
Right.
personal computers? Like, did Procter and Gamble adopt computers? I'm pretty sure they did.
Yeah.
Do they have a website? Yeah. Do their bookkeeping department use Excel? Maybe their data analysts and their data scientists use Python and all sorts of notebooks and big data solutions. And yeah, sure. So they've adopted a lot of other technologies too.
Yeah, I think another part of the article that I thought was really interesting is, right, like this notion of there's just going to be companies where there's maybe going to be like 2 or 3 employees just orchestrating like all these different agents, right? And one, I think it's going to be an interesting kind of skill set to develop of like, what does it mean to manage AI agents? What does it mean to like teach them to work with one another? So I think that just thinking about like that part of like, what does that entail? And like, what can you start doing today to get really good at that and kind of get leverage and maybe like making your teams faster and increase your productivity as you increase your team, assuming that's going to be not that expensive to kind of create agents. So that was interesting. The other part that I was thinking about is like,
for a second, though.
yeah,
I think that's a really important point that I think gets to the nut of what Ben Thompson is trying to say, which is that a changing technology context means you can have a new kind of company that we can't yet predict native to that context, right? So the P&G example is Dollar Shave Club, right? Before, what was it, 2008, 2009? Like, we could never have a Dollar Shave Club. The idea of doing direct consumer sales, subscription-based delivery, right? How'd all these pieces work together? Like, that was a product of online advertising that could not have been imagined before that particular point in time, that particular date and time. So if you're sitting inside a P&G, right, and you're running the exercise, right, of who's going to destroy our business, right? How is that going to happen, right? You can use Excel. You can have your entire staff get themselves onto, what was it back then? Facebook, Friendster, whatever it is, right? People can get their little, Blackberries and flip phones and use all those things, right? All of the things that people are doing that were smart there, but your business wasn't built to be a native business, and a native business has come into place. Of course, Dollar Shave Club was acquired by P&G, I think, actually. Gillette, I think.
Yeah, same with like native deodorant, same thing. Like they went super deep, like basically were super good at doing Facebook ads and then eventually sold it to them.
So my takeaway lesson, though, isn't think about how to rebuild your business for whatever technology era we have today, right? It's sure, if you're inside the current company, think about how you can make your job better, faster, more effective, more efficient using AI, absolutely. But somebody outside of your industry is going to discover a new context, right, that didn't exist before, and we can't predict it. Otherwise, it wouldn't be new context, right? That's what's exciting about this.
Do you think it's about like the business model? Like these examples, it's about the company's business model. Like somebody looking at the company from the outside would see something different. But here we're talking about how people work, right?
I think they're different.
Inside the company. So maybe the outside actually looks the same, but right, like the way this new company that's now AI native or started now, right, instead of started 5 years ago, is working, just like fundamentally, it's working differently.
I think it's more interesting to speculate about how the product's going to be different, right? Like, Notion replaced Word because Notion grew up in the era of databases, right? Free databases. So Notion, right? It's atomic units databases, whereas, Word grew up in the era of linear storage to disk, right? So that's how word processors all work, right? That's why Notion has it's a planted word. I have no idea, but it grew really, really big, really, really fast, right? By adopting this new paradigm. Like,
I
yes,
think both are true, right? Like
everybody uses Notion, and I think that's an important thing for us to do. But I think the value, the particular value of practicing the tools, like Tal and Ben and Mark, the three of you have been doing really carefully, like running experiments side by side. How do these things work? Where are the rough edges? How do I maximize it? Is partly to make yourselves and your current jobs more effective and your current roles more effective. But the real value is you're going to understand these systems so much better that you're going to have the ideas about how to build an AI native, whatever kind of company it's going to be, right? What's the AI native CPG company going to be? What's the AI native, I don't know, desktop application going to be? What's AI native advertising going to look like?
So Josh, are you saying that, because I think you're both right, but I just want to make sure what I'm hearing you say. So I fully agree with Tal, and Josh, I don't think you would disagree with this, that the way people work is definitely going to be, and it already is, but it's going to
It
be
already is. Yeah.
crazily changed by AI technology.
Yeah.
And then you're saying is as more teams use AI technology to do their existing jobs and work on their existing products better, it's only a matter of time until they start to shape their products to be more like the AI tools they use to do their jobs. So like AI
Or
is
more
going to
likely they're going to quit their companies or their legacy businesses. They're going to have a flash of insight and they're going to grow the next thing off of that.
I think in that sense, like the Mark, just like a quick thought on that, and then I'll go ahead. But like the only thing I'll say about that is like not everyone wants to be an entrepreneur.
Nope.
So I think that's like a human psychology attribute that's not going to be that changed by AI. So just because everyone can be an entrepreneur doesn't mean everyone will. Which I think means that if people are going to, if your bet is that AI is going to change the products that get built more than the way that people work, then that means like people will have to get creative with really embracing how to build their existing products with AI, which kind of puts us back into like the whole, how am I going to stuff AI into every nook and cranny in my product, which is we're seeing starting to, my take, I don't know if it's controversial at this point, is that so many of the products that have tried to just like stuff AI into their product have not done it well. And I don't think it's actually like moving the needle for like probably 9 out of 10 companies have just tried to like stuff AI into my product.
They've honestly made it worse. Mostly their products are worse for it.
This is a really good illustration. Like for me, because I get really confused, I've started to really always ask myself, wait, am I talking about how I use AI to build a product, or am I talking about building product with AI? And both are interesting.
Two
It's
different
just
words.
like,
yeah,
they're
I think
related, but like I keep them
both
separate.
are exciting.
Yeah.
But
Both are
I think
exciting,
at my current stage in my current life, what I'm doing, I think I'm personally getting more leverage out of it to do what I do currently better. So like how to use AI to do my current things. But I am trying to allocate a non-zero amount of my time exploring how to potentially also use it to build things, mostly out of curiosity at this point.
And that's my takeaway from the Sacheckery article, which I found interesting because like 90% of my time and thinking is around how do I use AI for tooling, right?
to help
Which is,
you.
I think, 90% of what we all talk about. But he's reminding us, which is like, this is why people pay him the big bucks, right? That there's a macro trend here, right? And if we want to remain relevant in this future of a macro trend, we need to at least be able to, we're not going to recognize it because we're not the ones, at least I'm not the one who's going to start that next company. But if we want to remain relevant in that future world, we should be doing our own personal explorations with an eye to how that could play out. That's all. Because while it makes you a better product manager to start using AI tools today as a product manager in your legacy business, right? Because whatever you're doing today is a legacy business by definition, right? If you don't do that, you're going to be useless in the future business.
At the same time, I agree with you. That's what he's saying. And that's also why reading that article convinced me, myself personally, not to focus on building products that have AI in them, but to really focus on how to build products with AI. Because then I'm like, how would I feel if I replaced the word AI with internet or Ajax or mobile? So for a few years, that was like all the rage. And then the next couple years of companies being founded, that would have been, it just was like the air we breathe, it was just like abstracted away. Big database is a great example. Mobile, like all these things used to be, let's talk about it all the time. And then a few years later, people graduated, started companies, and it was just like, why are you using that word? That's just like obvious, like I have a friend who jokes like everybody, you can tell somebody's like born before or after, I'll just say like whatever, 1980 is like, they put the word internet in front of nouns still, like I bought a movie ticket on the internet, as an example. Like you can, some people would say that, and for some people, like, why would you add the word internet? But the same thing I think will happen with AI. So it's going to be really exciting. There's going to be a big spike. There's going to be a lot to do, a lot of opportunity. It's going to change things. And also, I don't think it's going to be an enduring question we all ask ourselves the same way things that are enduring, like leadership, communication, emotional intelligence, management, organization, like that kind of stuff, which also will be very affected by AI.
So I agree with you, but can I push on that for a second? Because you thought about this more than almost anybody else. A lot of my career has been spent trying to figure out how to align engineering teams, how to share as much context as possible, as much context as is valuable, and motivate them. You use the word galvanize. I love that. Galvanize them to build something awesome. How do I do that? I bring them along for customer discovery calls. I make sure they understand who we're building for. I give them the business context. Like we do like all sorts of things that we've all done as product managers, right? In a world where engineers are gone, right? And it's all AI agents coding stuff for us, which will happen eventually, right? Like it's shitty today, but you can see which direction things are pointing in. Does that actually change our product management role? Like, does that change what we're doing? What our skill set is? Am I the dinosaur for caring about feelings and motivations?
I think you're still going to have someone that you have to galvanize. I don't, it's hard for me to see a world where there's not like a stakeholder or a person that you have to still kind of get on the same page and to do things, right? Like maybe it's an engineer that supervises all the AI agents. Maybe it's your investors. Maybe it's your customers, right? Maybe it's the people you're marketing to. So I think if you're doing product management right, I hate the way that came out, but if you're focusing on talking to users and solving their problems, I think that part of the job will always be the same. It's more about like, how can you use AI to get more leverage so you can spend more time doing that and less time doing maybe the boring stuff that you don't like or that maybe you didn't enjoy.
Also, what does it mean to galvanize a teammate today? Okay, it's, yeah, you get them excited and you get them to really understand what we're doing, but that's actually a byproduct of giving them context on what's going on, right? If you give good context on why we're doing something, why it's justified, what you need to know to do a good job, a human has this like extra, benefit or phenomenon, that like there's also like a spark, given that if they agree, if they care, if their ego aligns with it, whatever, like, but they're like, cool, oh, awesome, I'm pumped, right? But like most of what actually happened, like if there's a camera in the room, recording, and like it could describe what's going on, it's actually, think about your experience, Josh, would be like just telling the story and the background and sharing the homework you did as a product manager and sharing the customer discovery, and like that's actually what's happening. I think 99% of that is still going to be relevant to having AI do a really good job. It could probably like bake in like a cloud confetti to show that they're galvanized.
Yeah, I mean, there's like the small like interpersonal stuff, like appreciations, like, hey, like you crushed it there, you did a really good job, like congrats, or like remembers people's birthdays, or remembering people's like kids' names, things like that. That I think, yeah, that might be a little bit weird in the AI world, and I think like can be really useful for human interactions. But yeah, I'm with you. I almost feel like I've gotten better at giving context to AI than people, because I'm like, I know like they can just take a lot more context and do more with it than people can in a way. And I'm not sure, maybe it's like me just being lazy, because I'm like, hey, instead of like having to distill this into 3 sentences, I can just talk for 30 minutes. But I don't know. Yeah, it's an interesting world that we're going to move into.
Well, I think the reason, Mark, that you could probably get away with giving less context to people is because like there's a broader context of like who you are when you talk. So there's so many assumptions that you just like plug and play before you even have a first word exchange with one another. Whereas I think the AI, it knows nothing about you until your first interaction, right? So every single thing that it knows about you has to be fed to it. But if I meet you in Brooklyn for coffee, because in our email exchange, I was like, I'm going to meet you after I drop my daughter at daycare. And you've looked at my LinkedIn before we met. By the time we have our first real exchange of words in person, you know so much about me. And you could, so I do wonder if like there's going to become increasingly like really dramatic reductions in friction to get the AI to know you, so that you don't actually have to give it as much context. Like Tal, the whole like use better dictation or Whisper app or anything else to like just like ramble to the AI to give it all the context. Like I feel like the days of that are probably numbered too. Like I think it's going to get, there's going to be shortcuts for getting it to know you.
Yeah, I hope so.
This was actually the core idea behind the company I just shut down, because it was too complicated. People weren't sufficiently interested, but maybe I was just a year or two too early, which is, can you capture all that context that surrounds your life? Your text messages, your Slacks, all those things, the interpersonal context that surrounds your life. So when you go talk to somebody, you can be fed that back in a appropriate, useful way. Who's that Ben
That's
guy?
really similar.
Yeah.
That's really similar to like Gemini and Microsoft Copilot. That's their
Yeah.
big advantage, right? They have your inbox and everything. You have your phone.
Just sadly, inbox is pretty boring nowadays.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the real problem, is that, yeah, inbox is easy, right? Every CRM system has access to your inbox. It's your messages.
So maybe to close the loop on like that discussion about the PM role, kind of today versus tomorrow, like what is the verdict there? Is it that staying pretty much the same, just like more time to do the things that you enjoy and talking to customers, and maybe those are the highest leverage things, or do we think it's gonna fundamentally change in a way that we cannot even predict?
I have my thesis, which is very selfish and self-serving. So I'll share it with an invitation to poke holes in it, challenge me. So I think that the product manager in that future is, if you thought the product manager was a bottleneck today, if you felt like a bottleneck today as a product manager, just wait for that future and how much of a bottleneck you feel when, even if there's engineers around you, those engineers are way more productive, right? And maybe the distant future where it's just a bunch of AI agents around you, and you're being really supplemented by your own copilot or advisor, coach, whatever. So like if we felt overwhelmed and bottlenecky as product managers, like we have to really get our act together. Like we have to be really good at managing our emotions, like managing our time, right? This is why this is self-serving, because I happen to teach a course on this, being really good at using AI as a thought partner. So that's the future that I see. I think that's very much my lens. So
What do you think, Josh?
I'm going to play the I'm old hat again, and thinking back to what product management was like when I first got started and what product management is like now. I guess you can point to plenty of commonalities, right? Product managers are the people who take responsibility for outcomes in the absence of any control. But like the actual nuts and bolts work of being a product manager, like what you do all day, has changed really, really dramatically. The tooling, obviously, the pacing, not surprisingly, but even a lot of like the tasks. I'm not just talking about like, agile, going from waterfall to agile, but I think it's more profound than that. So I honestly have no idea, but I would not be surprised if, regardless of whether or not the title stays the same, the actual work that people do and what people do inside those roles is going to change in ways that are unexpected and surprising. It's hard to imagine parts of tech companies changing so profoundly as engineers being replaced by AI and not expect our own jobs to change as profoundly. Doesn't mean the work is going to go away, right? You still got to understand your market, understand your customers, right? And communicate that into a coherent vision and strategy. But who does that, how and why? I got no idea.
And Tom, I'm curious, why do you think that PMs are going to be just feel a lot more like a bottleneck and overwhelmed? Is it because like just things are going to move a lot quicker? Is that the main?
Yeah, I think the things that today take more time, that design takes time. It takes human creativity. That's a lot of glucose in the brain, right? Like that's coding, right? Preparing events for instrumenting a product and for the geotech, like all these, like really, these are very labor intensive and take a lot of time. And those are things that AI is already really good at and kind of even be better at. And a lot of things that are distracting, like could be the getting more details from a customer to solve a bug, or diagnosing, infrastructure problems, or getting more data. Like all these, there's just going to be a lot of time saved on things that are today very time consuming. And I can think of the times where I'm like, as a PM, like, oh, thank God, like this is going to take engineering so much time. Whew. I have time to like catch up and do this research and get ready for the next step. Like, okay, cool. I'm keeping them busy for like, the next 2 weeks. So like that gives me time to run these interviews. And like by the time like everybody's ready, or somebody's like, oh, we have a delay in this project, in my head I'm like secretly, okay, that saves me time. It's going to make me look even better in the kickoff because I'm going to have more stuff. So that's not going to happen anymore. Like I'm going to be the bottleneck. And yeah, I'm going to, like, I still have to do being really in the weeds to earn my seat as somebody making judgment calls, supervising AI's decision. I'm still going to be really in the weeds with customers. Even if I can like have AI help with customer discovery, I'm still going to have to read the raw data, in my opinion, right? I'm going to like really hold on to that for as long as possible. Like that's what's justifying my existence. And of course, we're assuming like why are engineers being replaced and not PMs? I think PMs and founders will be like the last human roles to be chipped away at. But yeah, I think there's just going to be a lot of things I still need to do, and then the expectations of me as a PM are going to rise. So wait, so you have like you had 5 engineers on your team in the past, now you have 500. Why aren't things moving 100 times faster? I need to have a good answer for that, or make sure they move 100 times faster myself.
Yeah, I think it's about creating leverage, right? Like if you're a PM who is bottlenecked, whether with AI tools or without AI tools, you're probably not creating as much leverage, and now the barrier to creating leverage and has gone down. So it's like you can't make as many excuses, right? Like and I'm saying that kind of half jokingly, but there is a subset of PMs that are extremely resourceful and create leverage wherever it's possible. And then I think there's a subset of PMs who are kind of like cover my ass, like do the minimum to just like phone it in kind of PMs. And I suspect that second category is going to struggle to stay relevant in this new world, because they're going to be competing with the very resourceful types. And the CEO with one PM is going to talk to the CEO that has a different PM, and one guy's going to be getting, or one gal's going to be getting like a massive amount of output from their PM, and they're never a bottleneck. And the other one's going to be like, everything keeps getting stuck in my PM, right? So I think the natural selection process is going to weed out people who cannot be extremely resourceful in creating leverage from these tools.
Yeah, I think where my head is going here is, one, that sounds really exciting, but also exhausting. Like it almost feels like you're like spending like the entire day like making critical decisions that I'm like feeling the pressure of like, hey, like I'm living leverage on the door every minute. I don't make this decision, or I don't get
It's an executive job. It's an executive job.
Yeah, but almost to like an extreme, right? It's like if you are able to delegate and like you have like infinite leverage, right? Like it's almost like to the point that like, does it even make sense to work the way we work? Like, does it make sense just to maybe work like 4 hours in the morning when you're like peak productivity, make those, and then once you're tired, you're like, nothing's good's gonna come out of this, right? And you don't have that like kind of like easy work anymore because that's all taken care of. Which honestly sounds kind of nice. Like I like if you're really good at those 4 hours, maybe that sounds like a dream job. Then the other part is like the really good PMs, right? Like I think they would think very hard of like, why am I here? Right? Like I can create that leverage for myself, have 100% of the equity. I'm just reporting to this CEO or founder. Like, why don't I just do that for myself? And I know what it takes. So I think that's going to be like another interesting point of like, you either going to have to pay these people very well or give them something that is really good. Otherwise, they're just going to do it for themselves.
I think every great PM and every great executive, I think PMs have always compared their work to executive work, are making decisions all day long. Like, I think I was a pretty good PM. This is how I tried to operate. And that's how I coach my clients to operate is if you're the one who's making all the decisions all day long, you're doing a bad job sharing context and responsibility with the rest of your team. And that's especially true when my clients are CEOs, right? Particularly first-time CEOs who end up bottlenecking everything through. I think, Tal, you're absolutely correct, right? You're going to feel like the bottleneck. And if you feel like the bottleneck now, you're going to feel like even more like the bottleneck, which only makes it extra important to be that good executive or that good whatever. And whatever your tools are going to be, can you delegate context, responsibility, and decision-making down to them? And maybe that's the moment when things are going to change, right? Because if the job is you have an infinite team of doers who do your bidding perfectly every time, but can't make a judgment call, your life becomes terrible. But if those infinite teams of doers can have the context, they can express good judgment, and your job becomes programming them to have better judgment, which is not entirely unlike what your job as an executive is, right? Programming your team. That's what alignment is all about. Programming your team to have good judgment. That's why you build a strategy. That's why you build company values. You're programming your organization to have good judgment. Then maybe your life becomes good.
And that ties into what you said earlier. I think that also answers, how are things going to change when engineers are replaced by AI? That part's not going to change. I think that part's going to stay the same. You're still going to have to really invest in context, in constraints. That constraint could be strategy, values, product principles, and so on, right? And that part's going to need, I don't know if it's a human PM or a PM function or PM, like thought process, but that's going to be important. And Mark, I think to your point, the PMs will also they won't be alone. They'll also have AI helping them. Maybe they'll be pairing with AI. Maybe there'll be an AI doing the PM job and a PM like reading the chat, and just making sure everything's going okay. All the above, right? On the table.
Yeah, coaching the models too.
So I think this is a good place to wrap. Tal, thanks for dialing in from Peru, and I hope your beach life is serving you well.
I'm surfing in an hour and a half, so
nice.
Yeah,
enjoy it. Mark, anything else you want to say?
Folks.
No, it was a lot of fun. That's a wrap. See you guys around. Bye-bye.
For me, I want to say this was successful. Same criteria as last time. Like, did it get me to think and say things and articulate things that I wouldn't have otherwise? A million times over. So.
Boom.
Boom, boom.
Amazing.
All right.
Thank you.
See you, gentlemen.
See you
Bye.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please share it with someone who you think would benefit from it as well. We really appreciate it. We'd also love a follow or a rating on Substack, Spotify, or YouTube. That's going to let other people find us. And if you have any topic recommendations for a future episode, please send myself or Mark a DM on LinkedIn. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks.